The reason we've published this report goes back to really what has happened in the last 10 years in the field of extreme event and disaster risk management. First of all, the economic losses associated with extreme events and climate has risen. For example, around 91% of the events, 79% of economic losses, and more than 90% of insured losses are weather related. Now, beyond that, last decade has really seen international negotiations along three topics of disaster risk reduction, climate change, and sustainable development. Now, all these framework agreement and consultations have brought the dialogue around the need for an integrated approach to managing risk of extreme events and climates, because we are not yet there, why the losses are going up and why we are not able to manage it. We need an integrated approach. Now, in these framework agreements, very specifically, the role of insurance industry has been noted, but we need to go from discussion to action. Now, last piece of this is that an integrated approach to disaster risk management requires risk analysis and modeling, so that the decisions that you're making forward are risk-based. It requires a comprehensive strategy that embraces early warning and preparedness, preventive measures, and very importantly, risk financing and insurance. Now, also, every time there is a disaster, there is an opportunity to reduce the risk. So that whole planning around reconstruction needs to be looked into with that long-term view. So this issue has really been discussed over the last 10 years. A lot of stakeholders have gotten engaged in the debate, and they're promoting the integrated approach, but it's not gaining the kind of momentum and skill that we need. So what we decided, it's time for us to recap the last 10 years, understand what has happened, what progress has been made, but also what are the major hurdles and gaps that's preventing us from really bringing this issue to action and start seeing clear evidence of the strengthening and increasing of resilience to these events in different communities. So this study essentially recaps the past, analyzes hurdles and gaps, and presents opportunities for future where we can bring the force of different stakeholders to solve this problem. I like to focus on solutions around public-private partnerships and really frame it around the integrated approach to managing extreme events and climate with the components that we've already discussed. Now, governments sit at the heart of coming up with solutions around that, and by doing so, they have a critical role in building enabling environments, policy and regulatory regimes that really lend themselves to engagement of the public sector and the private sector together to find solutions together. Second one is institutional capacity in the country, and really currently maybe there is still a lot of fragmentations around planning and budgeting of solutions for managing risk of extreme events and climates. Governments could really bring a more cohesion around building of these institutional capacities with a strong focus on building the financial systems and really ensuring that the various institutions in different levels of the governments and different sectors in the country come together to solve the problem together. Thirdly is data. We desperately need data on hazards, exposures, and vulnerabilities, and governments play a critical role in enabling collection of this kind of data and making it accessible for risk assessment, which is really the foundation of the entire planning for managing of such risk. The next one is government investment in early warning and preparedness, preventive and risk transfer measures. And to do that, governments need to think coherent and cohesively and talk to experts outside of government as to how this can be achieved best. And finally, governments play a big role in education and raising awareness around the risk and how managing them, whether it's to the public, to the businesses, and to the other stakeholders. Now, if you look at the role of the industry and in the insurance industry value chain along this integrated approach, at the heart of it is industry's innovation around risk modeling and its knowledge of risk and risk pricing. So industry can provide a lot of advisory, in an advisory capacity, a lot of support to the government for understanding of risk, which really significantly would enhance government's ability in planning forward. The second issue is around the significant amount of research and development that is being done through insurance industry for prevention, and that knowledge, whether it's prevention of risk within a critical infrastructure, within buildings, all the way for small residential for policyholders. All of this is massive knowledge that can really help governments in building their projects that ensures reduction of risk in a preventive mode. Third one is ability of the industry to settle contracts right after a disaster and settle claims. And this has been demonstrated in a number of cases, such as the recent, the 2011, the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear accident in Japan. There are many, many examples that can be shared along that. But at the heart of what the insurance industry can bring, it's innovation and its knowledge and experience around risk transfer and development of sound insurance programs that are scalable and sustainable. So there is significant benefit that can be realized if governments work with the private insurance industry around designing these kind of national programs that leverages the best of what the government can offer and the best of what industry can bring to the table. So really, in looking at what has happened over the last few years, and particularly since 2015, looking at how the industry is putting its energy forward, how the governments are putting their energy forward, with a lot of movement in the international community, I am ever so more hopeful that we are on our way to a new paradigm in public-private partnerships that finally will help in solving the issue of resilience in not only just the developed, but very importantly in mid and low-income countries. One of the main objectives of this report was to really delve into some of the fundamental challenges for why insurance and risk transfer is not harnessed globally to the extent that it should be and it can be. And in doing so, in our paper, we've provided an in-depth analysis of these challenges and hurdles overall, really going to the fundamental concepts of insurability of risk. And then we have segmented it in high-income countries as well as middle and low-income countries. I very much urge you to look at the report because these elements are well explained there. But what I want to emphasize is these hurdles could be addressed if there is a much stronger partnership between the industry and the governments in coming together, discussing the hurdles, go back to what is really driving the hurdles, and then devising solutions that really can overcome the hurdles in really addressing this resilient issue forward. And I'm really, again, quite hopeful that over the next years to come, some of these barriers will be addressed through these partnerships. At the heart of the whole report is partnerships and the need for a more coordinated, consolidated, aligned approach, engaging the industry, the government, and a variety of other stakeholders that are really influencing this field, working with governments and others. But specifically, we have 4 recommendations looking at the future of risk in this area. The first one is around the need for better appreciation of various stakeholders, being governments, businesses, communities, and individuals, around the benefits of investing in prevention, preparedness, and risk transfer. And our recommendation is to develop a number of case studies from real life where the socioeconomic benefits of prevention, preparedness, and risk transfer has been clearly demonstrated. The second recommendation is around foundation of good decision making, and that is risk-based. So when we looked around the world and we analyzed what has happened over the last 10 years, you see that particularly public sector still is not making a lot of its planning and decisions risk-based. So, and when you look at that, you see that there is need for building capacity within the governments in being able to develop risk information, understand and utilize risk information. So the second recommendation is to find realistic pathways where the industry can work with the governments to lend its knowledge in risk assessment, risk pricing, and methodologies for risk modeling to the public sector on one hand, but in light of challenges that climate change is putting in front of us with respect to the ability to be able to forecast what this risk may be, to also embrace new partnerships between the industry, government, and the scientific community in building the next generation of risk models that bring insights about future risks, particularly in relation to climate change. Third recommendation is around resilience of critical infrastructure. As you know, many governments from high, low, and middle income are planning to invest significantly in critical infrastructure over the next few decades. So why not build this critical infrastructure extreme event and climate resilient? And our recommendation around that is that insurance industry has significant knowledge and potentially role that it can play in an advisory role through its underwriting skills and other to really help governments to ensure that the critical infrastructure that it's invested forward, it's really built on the foundation of being extreme event and climate resilient. So exploring what the roles of insurance is in that regards is really a path that we have recommended. And then lastly, but very importantly, we see that over the last several decades and moving forward, mega cities and urban systems are becoming the centers of economic development. They're being developed in very high risk regions, particularly in coastal regions. So as our fourth recommendation, we are also suggesting that potentially insurance industry can play a significant role in working with local governments in building further resilience of these urban systems to extreme event and climate risk. Much can be learned from a number of recent events such as Sandy and others. So the recommendation here is to explore what role the insurance industry can play in working with the local governments in building and enhancing resilience of megacities and urban systems. So all in all, I think that I'm very happy to see that these topics are also being addressed by a number of other stakeholders, but I want to wrap up and say we need to bring our force together. You know, working in silos will not get us there. We need a new way of partnerships that brings us together to really work on some of these problems forward.